All right, ladies and gentlemen, fillies and gentle colts, here is Chapter 3 of Wild, Sweet, and Cool. But before we start reading, I've got a few tiny notes. One, I got a new mic. How does it sound? Good? Bad? Send me back $100? Hopefully it's good. Who knows? Maybe the settings are wrong. Let me know. Also, I removed the water cooling system from my computer, so it's back to air cooled. So hopefully it doesn't make too much noise. If it does, it'll be fixed next week, so don't worry. As always, I'm reading Wild, Sweet, and Cool, written by Quackerjack. This is Chapter 3, so let's jump straight into it.
Believe it or not, it's actually quite simple once you know what you're doing. Aileron. Twilight approached the practice field, levitating the saddle in an unmarked cardboard box beside her. She'd gotten a few weird looks from some of the residents in Ponyville, probably because unmarked cardboard boxes as bulky as this one tended to rouse the curiosity of others. Well, that, and the fact that it was somewhat unusual to see a unicorn levitate large objects all the way across town. Maybe I should just use a cart next time until I have to go off the road? The unicorn chased the thought through her mind. This was a minor detail that could wait until later. For now, she was more interested in learning why Rainbow Dash had insisted on arriving ahead of time, to take care of preparations, whatever those were. A glance toward the sky provided an answer. The Pegasus was zipping around, meticulously arranging fluffy pillars of water droplets into what was apparently some sort of obstacle course. Hey, you there! Twilight wasn't exactly certain how to respond to this statement of the obvious, except with an equally self-evident statement of her own. Yes, I am. Great. Just give me a minute or so to finish getting everything ready, and then we'll get started. The unicorn grinned slyly. A whole minute? Isn't that a little slow for you? Hey, this is the first time I've ever tried to teach any pony else basic aerobatics. I suppose that's why you brought your whistle today? But where's your cap? Hello? We're going to be flying all over the place. It'd probably just fall off. Well, we'll certainly be all over the place, considering how large this obstacle course is. It's not an obstacle course. It's a series of stations for us to work on different tricks. I'm pretty sure it's all set up the way it's supposed to be, but I want to make sure everything's just right. Twilight rolled her eyes. And you guys think I'm a perfectionist? Well, if you don't want to learn it, what is this not want to learn concept you're speaking of? I'm not familiar with it. I'm sorry, everybody. That's pretty funny. Quackerjack, you're a funny guy. Oh my god. What is this? I can't even read it. What is this not want to learn concept you speak of? I'm not familiar with it. Whatever. I'm going to move on. Rainbow Dash laughed at this joke. At least, she was pretty sure it was supposed to be a joke of some sort, given the unicorn's smile, and glided back to the ground. Okay, enough talking. Let's get strapped in. As the two ponies had gotten quite proficient at saddling up in the past few weeks, it didn't take very long at all before they were in the air. You ready to get started? Twilight Sparkle nodded. You bet. I've been reading up on the terminology just like I promised. I'm ready for anything you have to tell me about loops, rolls, turns, and spins. Rainbow Dash chuckled softly. Her friend's eagerness to learn about flying reminded herself of her own foalhood impatience. One thing at a time, okay? Let's start with the loops. The inside loop was undoubtedly the easiest of all maneuvers on the day's agenda, mostly because Twilight had been using partial versions of it as her primary means of inversion thus far. Twilight simply gave the signal for up, and since her directions were relative to the pair's current orientation at any given moment, continuing to go up caused Rainbow Dash to fly in a vertical circle. The Pegasus, knowing her friend always preferred to have as much information as possible about everything under the sun, started to give a somewhat involved clarification on the trick's name, explaining how flyers would visualize a circular band, sort of like one of Zecora's neck thingies. But Twilight cut her off. It's called that because I'm on the inside of the loop, right? Yeah, now that I think about it, it's true. I mean, it's basically a simpler way of saying what I was already saying, if you know what I mean. I think so. And the outside of the loop is the same, only I'm signaling down the whole time. And I'm on the outside of the loop, right? Pretty much. I take it you want to give it a shot. Indeed, Twilight did, and the first attempt was soon made. However, this proved to be significantly more difficult, as the unicorn's outside position meant the G-forces on the maneuver were pulling her away from her flyer, causing her to extend her legs and lessen the strength of the down signal.
This hadn't been a problem with the inside loop, since in that case she was being pulled toward Rainbow Dash, and Twilight Sparkle, like most ponies, had a lot more experience pushing against positive G-forces than pulling against negative ones. That being said, the particular rider was somewhat better informed than most beings due to her meticulous research habits, and had been mentally preparing for the extra difficulty. The fact that her hind legs had been getting regular workouts from the previous practices helped as well. It only took a few more tries before Twilight was making complete outside loops, although she clearly needed more practice before they'd be circular enough for performance in a theoretical competition. Still, Rainbow Dash decided that her student was proficient enough to try a more complex trick, the vertical 8. This was done by performing an inside loop followed immediately by an outside one, or vice versa, tracing a vertical figure 8 in the sky, hence the name. In order to help Twilight judge when each loop had been finished, the Pegasus set up 2 small cumulus clouds so that they resembled a colon. The 2 would perform an inside loop around the higher cloud and an outside loop around the lower, with the space in between acting like a gate to let Twilight know when to transition from one loop to the next. It was the same way the Pegasus had learned it in flight school, and not surprisingly, a teaching method that was successful for an academic underachiever like Rainbow Dash was outstanding for a pony like Twilight Sparkle, whose brain seemed to be hardwired for learning. However, beyond the vertical 8, most tricks, including all the ones Dash wanted Twilight to be familiar with, required proficiency at rolling. The most basic of maneuver in this catalog was the aileron roll. This particular trick, which was named after the Pegasus who first developed it, consisted of a complete rotation around the flyer's longitudinal axis, without any change in direction. It had been replaced by the barrel roll, which Twilight had experience with the previous week, as the first roll maneuver traditionally taught at flight schools, because it was much easier to perform. Or rather, it was supposed to be much easier to perform. But for some strange reason, Twilight seemed to have difficulty completing the rotation. She had no problem inverting, but re-inverting required so much physical effort on her part that she was tempted to declare learning it not worth the effort. A brief break to let the unicorn rest and read through the saddle's instruction manual didn't appear to do much good either. The manual made no mention of aileron rolls, but instead skipped them entirely in favor of barrel rolls. This stumped the two, until Twilight on a hunch suggested that they try the, allegedly, more complicated maneuver. When Rainbow Dash caved in, they quickly discovered that barrel rolls, while not exactly easy, took much less effort to pull off. "I don't get it," Rainbow Dash said as she hovered at the end of the line of cloud rings she'd set up for practicing rolls. "Aileron rolls have always been easier for me, and practically every Pegasus ever for that matter. I'm pretty sure even Fluttershy can do them when she's not feeling pressured. Why in Celestia's name would they be giving you more problems, when a barrel roll is basically the same thing combined with an inside loop?" This, however, caused Twilight to have a flash of inspiration. "Of course, it's the inside loop." Huh? Because the barrel roll has an inside loop, it creates positive G-forces for me. On the other hoof, the aileron roll is spinning around an imaginary line that goes through your body, but since I'm on the outside, that creates negative Gs. And this matters because, well, I indicate roll by leaning to one side or the other. This causes one of my legs to extend while the other one retracts. And then you roll in the direction I'm leaning. But leaning over like that is really difficult without positive Gs, since negative Gs tend to push me back into a normal sitting position. This explains why the instruction manual didn't even bother mentioning the aileron rolls. It's just too difficult for the rider to signal. Oh, come on. It's not like leaning over is the only way to get your legs to do that. It isn't? No way. I mean, you do that sort of thing all the time when you're trotting, right? One leg extends, the other one isn't. Or are you telling me you sway back and forth when you're walking down the street? But surely you're not the first pony to think of that. There must be some other reason they don't bring it up. Maybe. But the way we're strapped together, I can feel pretty much every move you're making. So if you don't make my instincts kick in, I can just think about it. Personally, though, I doubt it'll come to that. Come on, try it. Given that her only other option was to end the practice session early, Twilight agreed to give this a shot. The two ponies returned to their starting positions, and began a flat pass through the cloud rings. "Okay, Twilight," the unicorn thought to herself as they entered the Presidio tunnel. "Lift one leg, push off with the other, and hold." Rainbow Dash rolled to the right, fully inverted, and continued the roll until she reached her starting orientation, all in one smooth move. Sure, it'd been a little slow. Ideally, they would have completed it before exiting the rings, But the Pegasus decided that this was still worthy of a hearty Yahoo! I am so sorry, that sounded like Mario. Why did that sound like Mario? I'm so sorry. Let's just move on. We won't even talk about that. We won't do it. All right, let's move on. That was... wow. Twilight Sparkle concurred. So I take it my idea was a good one? Yeah, although I was a bit surprised at the direction. For some reason I thought we'd go left because I was pressing down on my left leg. But once I got over it, it worked pretty well, actually. Want to try it again? Definitely. The two did several more passes until Twilight got the feel for the procedure and felt comfortable enough to try incorporating the roll into other maneuvers. It still wasn't close to being pretty enough for competition, but then again, if the pair had wanted others to see this, they wouldn't have gone so far outside Ponyville in the first place. Learning the aileron roll allowed the two to move on to the Immellor turn. This required little explanation since Twilight had ridden along for one the previous week. One half of an inside loop with the half roll at the top to level out. Somewhat surprisingly, she suggested trying the split S before her flyer could even bring it up, on the grounds that it was the same thing, only in reverse. One inversion and a second half of an inside loop later, Rainbow Dash was confident enough that her student was ready for the most complicated trick of the day's agenda. The trick in question was the horizontal 8. When she heard the name, Twilight initially assumed it would be little more than the vertical 8 begin from a nosedive or a vertical climb, rather than a flat pass. An assumption which seemed to be supported by the fact that the course Rainbow Dash had arranged for the trick looked just like the one for the vertical 8, only turned 90 degrees. So the two clouds were arranged parallel to the horizon rather than perpendicular. In reality, the only thing the horizontal 8 had in common with its vertical counterpart was a vague resemblance to the number after 7. Starting from an ordinary flat pass, the flyer would complete 5/8 of an inside loop before performing an aileron roll. In other words, an Immellor turn, except for the roll occurred after the first inversion, when the flyer was at a 45-degree angle to the ground. Then, after continuing on the trajectory for a brief period, the flyer would execute 6/8 of a second inside loop, inverting again to the same angle as the first turn. The trick ended with the flyer returning to original altitude and leveling off. According to Rainbow Dash, the reason she wanted Twilight to give this trick a try was so she could practice stringing together different maneuvers so she could make the transitions as smooth as possible. It was this that the Pegasus claimed that made aerobatics impressive, and not coincidentally, it also was the reason relative few Pegasi were qualified to become full-time flyers like the Wonderbolts. It demanded an extremely sharp mental acumen, or else one risked disaster, usually to one's professional reputation, but sometimes to the well-being of other ponies, especially when flying in formation. Lucky for me, you've got brains to spare, so this should be no problem for you. Well, I'm certainly glad that you're confident about this. Great, let's get to it. Rainbow Dash's plan was to start out using the whistle to signal when Twilight was supposed to be transitioning to the next section of the maneuver. The point wasn't to let the unicorn get her timing down perfectly, rather, it was intended to help her learn what her physical orientation was supposed to be when the aileron rolls were meant to be executed. After several tries, she felt confident enough to give the horizontal 8 a try without Rainbow Dash's coaching. The first half of the trick went off without a hitch. Twilight guided her friend through the partial loop and rolled at the exact spot where she had in the practice runs. This isn't so bad, she thought to herself as she approached the second loop's inversion, which was a problem because at the time she was supposed to be thinking about aileron rolls. Twilight realized almost immediately that she'd executed the second roll just a bit too early as she headed straight for the cloud. This didn't cause her too much concern other than the mild disappointment at having made a mistake. 1 second later, however, the unicorn was abruptly reminded of one of the most often overlooked corollaries of a Pegasus's ability to walk on clouds, namely, the ability to crash into them. Of course, one doesn't become the winner of the Best Young Flyer competition without learning how to quickly recover from mid-air collisions, so Rainbow Dash had little trouble regaining control and hovering while her rider collected herself. Are you okay, Twilight? Yeah, I'm fine. I just didn't expect hitting a cloud to jerk me around so much. Well, you're a unicorn, so you normally pass right through them, which means that you kept going for a little bit, even though I had already stopped. Right, conservation of momentum. The Pegasus had heard enough about the physics involved in flight over the years to recognize the phrase, even if she had never quite remembered exactly what it meant. so she assumed that her friend knew what she was talking about and decided to move on to the next subject. Well, I'm sure you'll be ready for it next time. You're right. Let's get back to it. Sorry, Twilight, but I gotta pull the plug here. My wings are getting tired, and believe me, straining a wing is not something you want happening at these altitudes. I was hoping that we get to spins. The book I read made them sound so beautiful and graceful. Well, yeah, I'll admit that they're really kick-awesome to watch when they're done by a flyer who knows what she's doing, but they're really difficult and dangerous, and you're not even close to the skill level needed for me to feel comfortable letting you do that yet. In fact, I'm not sure if I have the skills to pull one off if you're just sitting on my back like a sack of potatoes and let me take over. I mean, I'm more of a speed specialist to begin with, so I don't practice that graceful stuff near as often. Oh, that's too bad, I guess. Besides, to do a spin you have to stop flapping your wings entirely for the duration of the trick, so I wouldn't really be getting any extra strength training in by having you ride along. Twilight sighed. No point in mopping about, I guess. After all, we made some good progress today, right? Some progress? Twilight, it took me months to learn how to do everything you did today. I mean, granted, it's still a little sloppy, but that's nothing we can't fix with some practicing. The unicorn grinned sheepishly. Well, to be fair, I don't have to worry about the actual mechanics of flying. All I'm really doing is pointing you in the direction I want to go. Rainbow Dash chuckled as she landed on the grass. Alright, be modest if you want. Still, I'm saying it's a shame you weren't born with wings. You'd be a natural Pegasus. Flattery will get you nowhere, Twilight replied as she released herself from the saddle. Same time next week? Definitely, the Pegasus replied as she removed the saddle and placed it in the box. There's going to be some really thick stratus clouds over the Ponyvale area, which basically means the entire sky will be padded, so we can take a few more risks. Maybe even a spin? Maybe, but I have something else in mind. Well, that's it for Chapter 3 of Wild, Sweet, and Cool. Hope my new mic as well as my computer didn't buzz loudly. But I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I cannot wait for next week to find out what Rainbow Dash has in mind for Twilight. But, as always, that's going to wait till next Thursday. One thing, though, I would like from you guys is, can you leave a comment in the comment section about what story you guys would like Mike to read? He just finished... Well, he didn't really finish. He decided to stop reading Fallout Equestria. So he needs a new story. So if you guys have any ideas or any suggestions, please leave them in the comment section. I would love to hear them. I'll pass them on to him. And I hope you guys have a great evening, and I will see you guys next week. Bye. The Inside Loop. The Inside Loop was undoubtedly the easiest of all the maneuvers on the day's agenda, mostly because Twilight had been using partial versions of it as a primary means of inversion thus far. Twilight simply gave the signal for up, and since her direction were... Oh my god! No phone! No! Not during voiceovers! Not during voiceovers! Stop it! Who's calling me? Ukraine. Ukraine is calling. The country itself is calling me on the phone. Thank you for interrupting voiceovers, Ukraine.